Hey guys, what's going on? Jeff here from Films at Home, and in today's video we're going to talk about the worst 4K Blu-rays that are out there on the market right now. Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to the channel. I was going to take a break until New Year's, but I put out a post yesterday on YouTube in the community portion and asked people what they wanted to see, and I thought that this video would be a really good follow-up to the previous one I did where I listed the top 10 4K Blu-rays of 2019. What people wanted to hear about was the worst 4K Blu-rays. What should they avoid when starting a collection? What do you not want to waste your money on upgrading? Or what do you think you can just buy in Blu-ray and not have to pay extra for the 4K? And so I wanted to help some people with that. This was a highly requested topic. I've been meaning to do it for a long time, and I think it fits nicely with what we just covered in our last video, so I'm going to tackle it here. If you do like this sort of content, 4K Blu-ray, home theater, movie collecting, please consider subscribing to the channel. We've had a ton of new subscribers lately, so hello to all of you and thank you for subscribing. And if you haven't yet, if you're one of the roughly 60% of people who watch my videos who haven't subscribed, it'd be awesome to get you subscribed to this channel so you can keep up to date with all the latest content. Now with that being said, let's jump right into this video. So I'm not going to go in any particular order. It's really hard to rank things. Me personally ranking bad things, like is this worse than that? I don't know. But I'm just going to give you some prime examples of what you should avoid, in my opinion, on 4K Blu-ray. The first one is Terminator 2 Judgment Day 4K. I did not like this. I reviewed it a couple years ago when it came out, and it just didn't feel like it was much of an upgrade. In fact, I thought it was distractingly bad and that the Blu-ray was better. There were some changes they made to the 4K with CGI, which looks really bad in 4K. They tried to do some kind of editing after the fact. And so there's a reason why I still have my Terminator 2 Blu-ray. I keep this around because I'm not going to get rid of it. It's good to have for review purposes and for videos like this. But the audio was not great, the visuals were not that good, and so you can find this Blu-ray edition for easily $5 or under. If you're buying it used, it shouldn't be any more than a couple of dollars at this point. And I would totally avoid this 4K release. It's just not that good. It didn't impress me, and a lot of the changes they made with additional CGI and little things like that really softened the picture and made it look terrible in my opinion, and the HDR grading really didn't do it any favors. And so I thought that this was a big disappointment by Lionsgate and that the Blu-ray is a better option when it comes to owning this movie. The next one here on my list is going to be Star Wars The Last Jedi in 4K. I honestly just wasn't really impressed with the HDR grading. Again, I didn't think that the resolution uptick helped at all. It was very CGI heavy. There were a lot of effects in this movie, and it just didn't help. The way it was shot was not something that's going to allow 4K to take full advantage of. I think that Rise of Skywalker is going to look much better on 4K, and I think that The Force Awakens, when we get that 4K transfer, will also look much better. But Star Wars The Last Jedi just didn't do it for me. One thing to note is that you're only getting an Atmos track if you buy the 4K copy. Typical with Disney, they really want you to buy the 4K even when they do a crap job, and so they only put a 7.1 track on the Blu-ray, Atmos on the 4K. You cannot get the Atmos audio on any other release, so that may be a reason to buy this in 4K, but I would not spend the extra money. I think that you're fine with the Blu-ray release, and this upcoming Skywalker saga in 4K, I'm really interested to see what happens there because I don't think The Last Jedi is going to be a very good release. Really curious what the prequels are going to look like. I think those could be crap 4K releases as well, and I'm curious what they do with the original trilogy. There are some really good 4K restorations already available online, and I just have a feeling that Disney isn't going to put the effort in to match with those, and it'll probably just be a carbon copy of what's on Disney Plus, which we've learned is fake HDR and not very good 4K resolution. It looks very sharp and it looks better than their previous Blu-rays, but it's not true 4K, so it's a little misleading. If they do that, then Star Wars as a whole could be something to avoid on 4K, so be very careful before pre-ordering that set. I would wait for reviews on that one. Another release I got in this year in 4K that I was really hopeful for but didn't do it for me was Pan's Labyrinth. The reason was that there is a Criterion release of Pan's Labyrinth on Blu-ray, which is much better than this 4K release. I thought the Blu-ray had better color grading. I think that more time and effort was spent on the remastering of that Blu-ray for Criterion, and the HDR I thought really screwed with this. I prefer the Blu-ray. I prefer what Criterion did, and the Criterion Blu-ray actually looked sharper in many points than this 4K did. The 4K looked a little bit soft, looked like a lot of time hadn't been spent on it. It was one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me, and Warner Brothers typically does a very good job. They did The Shining, they did 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I was really excited for this release because they've been doing really well with their 4K, but this was a definite disappointment because they had to compete with the Criterion Blu-ray, which I also own. That would be the preferred version in my opinion. I would stay away from Pan's Labyrinth in 4K, and I would instead spend your money on the Criterion Blu-ray release because that they did an excellent job on, and it has more special features and it's loaded with stuff that this release simply doesn't have. Another one from Warner Brothers that I was a little disappointed with this year, that was Gremlins. Another movie I was really looking forward to. It's an older movie shot on film. Thought it could do a really nice job on 4K, but it almost seems like Warner Brothers is like a tale of two groups making these movies. Like they've got some really high-end stuff being done with their premium, releases like The Shining in 2001, and then it's almost like they have a different group, or they just spend less time and effort on stuff like Pan's Labyrinth and Gremlins, because I didn't see the need for this to be in 4K. I preferred the Blu-ray picture, I preferred the Blu-ray color grading, I didn't think HDR did this any favors, and I thought the grain structure was very, very heavy. It almost looked like they just ported over a Blu-ray release onto 4K and just did some basic like software editing to try to make it, match to 4K. They didn't do like a real full remaster from an original negative. I didn't have any information on this, and so that's usually a telltale sign that it's kind of just a port over from Blu-ray to 4K. It was a 35th anniversary edition, which gives them another reason to do that. I just wasn't impressed with it. It honestly looked like a Blu-ray that they just put on a 4K disc, and that can be really dangerous because the Blu-ray is using a lot less pixels. If you just take that same transfer and pop it onto 4K, the grain's going to be a mess. The detail's not going to be good. It's going to look fuzzy. It's not going to look sharp because you're trying to take, whatever it is, 2 million pixels and bump that up to 8 million, and you're not actually doing any restoration work. I don't know if that's what happened here, but that's the vibe I got. And so I would stay away from this and just opt for the, there's a 30th anniversary, or maybe it's a 25th anniversary Blu-ray. Either way, I have it. I kept it in my collection, and I would recommend going with that for, roughly $5 again, than spending $15 to $20 on this 4K release. Now, this next release, I hate to knock this company because they've been doing a really good job with physical media releases. They're always putting out new Blu-rays, and they've been experimenting with 4K, which is hard to do for a smaller studio like this. But this is from RLJE Films and actually Fangoria. And it is Puppet Master, The Littlest Strike. So a lot of people know the Puppet Master series. It's kind of a cult horror series. But this was a seriously disappointing 4K disc because there's a total lack of HDR. They didn't do any HDR grading. And the 4K basically looks exactly like the Blu-ray. I could not tell any difference. It's almost like they just put the Blu-ray transfer on the 4K disc and didn't do anything to it, and they just said, oh, here it is in 4K, here it is in Blu-ray. You could get the Blu-ray on this one. If you really wanted this movie, I would not spend the extra money on the 4K disc because there's nothing added here. Even the audio is just DTS HD 5.1, which you get on the Blu-ray. It has, like I said, there's no HDR, which is crazy to me. If you're going to put out a 4K release, you have to put some HDR color grading on it. That is the big difference maker. It's not usually the resolution, it's usually the HDR. And this is a low budget movie, and so I can see they tried to do something. They tried to get into the 4K game, but it's really not good, and it's almost like a cash grab. You don't need 4K for this at all. I know it's a lesser known title, but just something to be aware of. I know there are a lot of horror movie fans out there. Don't touch this one with a 10-foot pole. Just get the Blu-ray if you really need to own it. And now the last one, this is another one I have reviewed somewhat recently and wasn't impressed with, and it's the original animated version of Aladdin. Disney is sort of hit or miss when it comes to these from what I've seen. And so as a whole, I would be very careful when buying Disney 4K animated titles. Sometimes they're a home run, like Toy Story 4 was excellent, and I've heard good things about some of the other transfers. But I was not a fan of Aladdin because I didn't like the way they messed with the colors. I thought that the color grading was really poor on the HDR. It was artificial looking. It didn't look like what the filmmakers originally intended for. You've got to remember, this is like hand-drawn animation, so they are coloring things and doing exactly how they want things to look when they're doing this animation, and then you're taking it and you're regrading it with HDR and making it look like a totally different movie when it comes to color and all that. And the resolution upgrade on this was not worth it in my opinion. I didn't see any noticeable uptick, and if anything, the HDR just annoyed me more. There is an Atmos track. Again, this is classic Disney. Atmos on the 4K, but not on the Blu-ray. So if you want the Atmos track, you're gonna have to go with the 4K. But all of these new releases in the Signature collection from Disney, they did The Lion King. I'm trying to think what else they did. They did Little Mermaid in 4K, and now they've been coming out with all the movies in 4K. Cars and all the Toy Story movies and a lot of the old Pixar stuff, The Incredibles and Wreck-It Ralph and Brave and all the stuff from Pixar. I would be very careful with those. Read your reviews. Make sure that it's worth the upgrade. I do think on some of the digital animation that the HDR probably will be an improvement, because that is something that they're going to be able to do a better job with than hand-drawn animation, in my opinion. I've seen that on Toy Story 4. Like, that's clearly a very good 4K release. But any of the older stuff I'd be very careful with. Read your reviews. I'd honestly be very careful with anything Disney puts out on 4K because of what we've seen with Disney Plus, fake HDR, kind of iffy 4K transfers. Some are good, some are bad. And so all the Marvel movies that they've been putting out on 4K now, I'd be really wary about upgrading all those, especially because the Blu-rays are very good and most of them are just 2K transfers anyway. And I'd be careful about all these animated movies. And like I said, Star Wars. Just be very careful with Disney because you know what Disney's out to do. They're out to make money. Sometimes they put out a great product, but sometimes they put out some crap and they make you pay $30 for it, and it's really not worth it. Definitely do your research before touching anything from Disney and now 20th Century Fox, just to make sure that they're doing the best job they can and you're getting your money's worth. So that's it for this video. This gives you a rough idea of what to look out for, some specific 4K movies to avoid, and there are others out there that I just simply don't have in my collection for one reason or another. Maybe I never got sent them from the studio because they were probably embarrassed, or maybe I never bought them because I heard that they were such a bad 4K transfer. There's also stuff out there to be really wary of when it comes to like new transfers of movies. Think about like what Lionsgate is doing. They're kind of putting out a lot of movies like Conan and Legend of Hercules, and movies that are just like not very good, and they're getting varying reviews on 4K. The Conan Barbarian 4K release is supposed to actually have great video, but Legend of Hercules not so much, and so it's really hit or miss. Always do your research. Always do some research on whether this is a true 4K or a 2K upscale. That could help you make a purchase decision, especially on an older movie or something within the last 10 years. And always be really wary of any kind of new 4K releases. Like I said, stuff like Star Wars, Disney, even going back, Lionsgate stuff, and even Warner Brothers with stuff like Gremlins and Pan's Labyrinth. You've got to always do your research, and that's why I think that my channel's been helpful, hopefully for a lot of you. I like to get the reviews out before the movies actually hit shelves if I can. That's where the studios have been really helpful, sending me stuff. I can get reviews out a week early. You guys can cancel pre-orders if the thing's no good, or you can go ahead and order it ahead of time if it's a great 4K release. Those are things that you really need to do your research on with this new format. We're still very early in the days of 4K, and it's like Blu-ray was in 2007, 2008, 2009. You never know what you're going to get. By the time we get to 2014, 2015, most Blu-ray releases were pristine. They looked great. They sounded great. The industry really figured out what they needed to do, and we're still in that learning process for 4K. So just be very wary before you spend a bunch of money and drop, say, $200 on a Star Wars set where half of those movies might look like crap on 4K. I would be very, very wary of spending that amount of money on unproven 4K transfers, especially with what we've seen on some streaming services with fake HDR. And so I don't mean to dump on Disney, but it's just you've got to be careful, and they're a prime example of why. So this hopefully was very helpful for you guys. I know it was highly requested. These are some movies to avoid. I gave you some tips, what to look for, and hopefully it helped, because I don't want anybody wasting money that goes, that's counterproductive to what we're trying to do. And if you waste money on bad releases, then the studios are going to put out more bad releases and not spend the time and effort they need to on good stuff on 4K. So that we can make this format a little more viable, and really make it what it's supposed to be, which is the highest quality available. There should be no cases where we're going backwards on 4K, but unfortunately in these early days we do see that. So if you are interested in this type of stuff, like I said, please subscribe. Check out all the links to my Instagram accounts, Amazon links to different things you can purchase from my home theater, projectors, home theater seating, TVs, speakers, all the stuff that I use in my reviews. I put links to so you can purchase those and help support the channel. And I really appreciate everybody watching. Hope you have a great new year. Happy 2020, and I'll be back soon with more videos.